Hi, this is Bob Samuels from Tech Connector. One of my favorite things to do is talk to really sharp marketers about things they know much more about than I do. And I've got a couple of great guests today, Jess and Rishi. And if this is a preview of some presentations they'll be making at next month's B2B Marketing Expo in Los Angeles. So I'll provide ways where you can register for free and attend their presentations as well as some other ones out there. It should be interesting. If you guys can introduce yourselves, Jess, if you can start a little bit about yourself, um, tell us a little bit about your presentation, and also maybe a fun fact that we wouldn't know about you if we looked at LinkedIn.
Sure. My name is Jess Lewis. I run a brand clarity studio called The Rebrand. It was a complete accident. Never ever thought that I would be doing this, certainly on my own in this way. I started off my career as a theater producer, but for the majority of my career as a properly formed adult, I was in corporate. I was at Netflix and I was at Meta for a very long time, and just kind of assumed that I would just kind of keep going that track. And then a mentor of mine who was running a startup for entrepreneurs tapped me and asked if I would consult for him. And my first thought when I heard that was like, doing what? I truly just never saw myself doing my own thing. So I started to take him through a rebrand. I work in a very, very specific niche in brand development, which is building brand architecture and narrative strategy. Most people, of course, when they think about brand, they're thinking logo, colors, website, all of the things that are really the expression of a brand. And I do the blueprint building. So you drive down a street, you see all these beautiful homes. They're there because of a blueprint, but you don't see the blueprint. It's kind of barely there, but everywhere. And so that's the work that I do. And he said, you really should be doing this for other people. And he just so happened to have a big network of entrepreneurs. And I said, well, why don't you subcontract me out and we'll just, kind of see what happens. And then it really kind of started to take off. And I tried to manifest getting laid off from Meta during the big layoffs, and did get laid off from Meta during that time. And it was the best thing, because I was able to walk right into this. So that's what I am doing now, and the type of work I do. A fun fact about me that probably you wouldn't know from LinkedIn is probably the best good, bad decision I ever made was moving to Australia for a boy in my late 20s. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Completely changed my life and took me in a completely new trajectory. We broke up very early on in my time there, of course, but it was sort of the big sliding doors moment. So my fun
Thank
fact.
you. I love what you call yourself as a brand architect and narrative strategist. I think it's lovely, and it's very clear what you do. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Uh, Rishi, oh, you're on mute. Rishi, you're on mute.
Ah, gotcha.
Here we go.
I'm a business person that happens to do marketing.
There
So
we
it's
go.
good to meet everybody. Uh, my background has been primarily in business strategy, business development, and I've made the very natural pivot, I feel, into marketing and branding. Ultimately, if you are organized and communicating properly, you can be a good marketer. And beyond that, if you understand branding, you can become a great marketer. So I like to combine all those things in everything that I do. At this point, I recently started a company with my co-founder called escargot.io, where we connect brands who have open work with agencies that are looking to connect with them. Think of it as a Fiverr Plus, where folks are not exactly freelancers and brands are not exactly looking for one-off work. It's a RFP marketplace, essentially, that we've put together.
Thank you. Any fun facts?
Yeah, I got pulled over within 2 miles of starting the cannonball run, so I didn't get to finish it. So soon, I hope.
Excellent. And about your presentation, the topic is it's there's egos in there somewhere.
That's right. My presentation is called Ego Death.
Ego
Ultimately,
death.
I think as marketers, you have to have a certain level of audacity where you think that something that you're putting out, something that you're communicating is worthwhile for other people to listen to. That audacity is great. However, ego has become such a huge thing, especially as you do high level marketing, especially at these Tiffany franchises that sounds like both of us have spent time at, or all of us have spent time at. Now, ego death has to occur at every level. You have to realize that most people don't care what you have to say. You probably aren't saying it the right way, and your customer is not going to make their final decision based on one piece of content. If you can kill that ego across the board, you can begin to do interesting stuff.
So that means you have to try out new things and not get tied to any one particular
To
tack.
get to the nitty gritty, make sure to jump in on the talk that day. But essentially, the core of it is you need to really forget the way marketing has been taught in the past. I have spent time teaching digital marketing in college courses before, and we've really fallen in love with this idea that there is a very true funnel. Now, I'm going to talk about this from the lens of both consumer marketing and B2B marketing. The reality is, a funnel is a fancy way for us to sell in the work that we do internally, but it's an idealistic way to look at the world. I want everyone to consider themselves in their own purchasing decisions. Are you aware of where you're at in the funnel with what you're buying? Maybe if you're buying a car, maybe if you're buying a house, but those impulse decisions, you're not able to look at it and say, you know what? I've successfully matriculated to the bottom of the funnel here and I'm about to convert. It's sort of an incoherent way of us to look at marketing strategy for us to think that we can naturally progress people through this just because we want them to get there. And that's the crux of what I'm talking about.
Excellent. And Dave had a good comment. Good marketing isn't about us, the marketers. So
Yeah, I would agree. We want it to be about, I want it to be about me, but the reality is oftentimes our end user, the consumer or the buyer, whoever it is, the B2B buyer, they don't they don't necessarily care who we are. They don't care about our fun fact, but they do care that we can connect them to some endpoint that they want, whether it's better conversion, whether it's saving money, whether it's efficiency internally. They can connect with those ideas. And once you figure that out, you have something to work with.
Well, I would say that good marketing isn't even about your product or your service. It's about whatever is bigger than that, right? Like if you look at a Nike, right, or an Apple, gold standards of brands that are the brands of brands, they're not really selling you shoes in their marketing. Yes, you are purchasing a pair of shoes, right? Or you're purchasing a computer, but Nike is selling you the belief in yourself that you can do anything. They're selling you the celebration of athletics. They're selling you the universal truth that if you just do it, right, you too can ... And the same with Apple, right? Like they're selling you a computer or an iPad or some device, but what they're really selling you in the way they communicate their marketing is that if you think different, going back to their manifesto, if you think different, you too can be an artist. You too are a creator. You too can change the world. Now you need our devices to do that, right? But that's not really what they're selling you, especially in their earlier days. And so all of the really good brands understand that it's always about what are you selling that's actually bigger than your product, that is more of a universal truth that will inspire belief as opposed to sales. And so that, I think, is what good marketing is. And it's a negotiation too, right? Like marketing and negotiations are they're no different. It's, you know, if a negotiation is getting somebody else to do something that they may or may not want to do, that's what marketing is, right? You want someone to do something that they may or may not want to do. And so that means you can either be on the offense or the defense, like in a negotiation. And so I think the key to how to be a good marketer is to figure out a way to stay on the offensive versus being on the defensive. And I think what we see a lot is that most brands are on defensive marketing, which looks very much like playing it safe, telling, not showing, not taking risks, assuming that you don't have the power, right? Assuming that you need to either, I guess I'll use the word pander to what you think people are thinking about your brand versus driving your own conversation and coming off confident as if you don't care if people are on your train or not. Grammarly, I know, is a great example of this. I don't know if anybody's seen those billboards that they have lately where they'll just write out statements and then like correct the grammar in it. Statements that are grammar errors that we all make, not obvious ones, you know, but like grammar of using like, you know, could instead of, could not, or couldn't instead of could not, the little things like that that are like not perfect, perfect English, and they'll just correct your grammar. They don't tell you what their value props are. They don't say, we are the best at, with us you get ABC. They just put out these ads where they're correcting your grammar. And it's funny, right? And it's so confident that we're on the train and they're going with or without us, right? So I think that that's something else to keep in mind when you're thinking about like what is good marketing, but then also how do you market well?
Yeah, interesting. David mentioned controversially, Nike was recently, quote, winning isn't for everyone. So it sounds counter to what the just do it.
Not necessarily. I mean, the way I interpret winning isn't for everyone means that you don't have to actually get the gold star to feel good about yourself.
And you can still buy the shoes.
You can still buy the shoes and you don't have to have like, oh, wow, I came in first place to feel validated and to feel like you can't also just do it and still be edified or find value or get something out of it. I actually find that to be a really empowering message in a world where, especially in America, right? Like we tend to believe that everything that is of value, culturally speaking, not every individual, but everything that is of value is something you can quantify in a PowerPoint. I wrote a best-selling book. I won a Nobel Prize. I've been on a fancy TV show. I won an Oscar, all of these things. I got an A. I went to Harvard. And I think that winning isn't for everyone, to me, is saying like, that's doesn't have to be that way. And you can be just as great if winning isn't your end game. So I don't know. That's my interpretation.
I think your interpretation is correct. So this isn't the counter to that, but I think overall Nike's in a weird spot right now. I don't know that that's necessarily going to last. The reality is, my personal belief is absolutely winning is the core of it. We have to put out the best stuff at all times. You have to aspire to be the best. Nobody aspires to be the second best. Absolutely. I know with both of you, you want to put out the best podcast today, right? You want to make the best narrative architecture for your clients. Similarly, it feeds into this idea that there has to be an end goal in mind. I think with Nike, winning isn't everything versus being part of their ethos of competition is sort of incongruent with what their messaging is, which is why ultimately I think that sort of messaging will fall apart. I think in the reality is that in sport, there is a winner and there is a loser. And just in business, it's the same way. Your product's going to either win out for your marketing's either going to win out for attention or it's not. And that attention is constant. You know whether you're doing well or you're not doing well. Personally, me and my teams have put out tons of viral marketing. We've been trending left and right, but our ROI has been horrible on some of our campaigns, whereas our community campaigns that were pennies on the dollar really drove real value for us from a dollars and cents standpoint. Now, in marketers' eyes, the awards are great. You get a few lions, you get a few Webbies, you win all these sort of events awards. That's great, but it's really just for a cool LinkedIn post. On the flip side, some of the cool things that you do with brand structure, brand narrative, that architecture, it really shows up in the community. And those types of things are where we see the wins that we're going to see going forward across the board. I think modern marketing is going to see that shift. Nike is an interesting use case. I believe their CEO just stepped down. We'll see what happens with them.
Interesting. So I think you both have experience in B2B and B2C. So where do you see the differences? And my background's B2B, but and most of the audience I think is as well. But so where do you see the differences on the branding?
Sure.
Outreaches.
Yeah, I'll sort of jump in on that one first. Consumers are consumers, and intention is attention. So I can't speak to you differently. Like, Bob, I can't talk to you as consumer Bob versus B2B Bob, but I can speak to the outcomes that you're looking for. Now, if what drives you is this concept of wanting to create the best possible program for your guests to watch, right? That doesn't necessarily permeate into your personal life, But that sort of mindset, the psychographic analysis that we would do of you would still show that you care or you have some level of empathy, and that would manifest itself in some level in the marketing that we do. I think at a very fundamental level, if you just want to check boxes, you would say that a B2B type of sales is something that you're likely not actively seeking, and a B2C type of sales is probably a little more proactive on your end. Now, what does that mean? You have this idea of cold selling on one side versus warm on the other. So a lot of what we try to do with our B2B clients is sort of warm them up so you're no longer having this cold situation. I think the best way to do that is via effective branding and brand narrative, which there's I would say a lot of the work that it sounds like Jess and team does is around this type of storytelling. I think that ultimately is what will warm things up for clients.
Thank
In
you.
my world, there is no difference. If you're talking to another human and you need to connect with them in some way, either to raise money from them or sell to them or enter into a partnership with them or any other means of a connection point, narrative is the most important thing. And that's just the way it is in life too, right? If you're having the right conversation in the right way with the right person, you can get your kid to go to bed when they don't want to go to bed. You can get your dog to stop chewing your shoes when you want them to stop chewing your shoes. And you can raise the money you need to raise by saying just the right thing. I think that we today underestimate the power of words because we don't live in a world anymore where words are the star of the show, because of digital, because of social, because of image, because of all of the other tools we have now of communication, which are great, which are really, really great. But I think what that has done is it's, of course, made our reading time attention span a lot shorter, right? Like you go to a website and there's a whole lot of text and you're like, oh, I got to read a lot of text, right? Or, now we're all listening to audiobooks, right? And not even reading books because it just feels a little bit more tedious. But I still believe, like at the end of the day, the greatest weapon you have in your arsenal is the right words at the right time to the right person in their language in the way they need to hear it. And when you nail that, if you have no money in the bank, if you have nothing else at your disposal to work with, you will get what you want. And that's why for me, B2B and B2C, there really is no difference in my world. Where I do see a little bit of a difference though is in when you're putting together a go-to-market approach, with a narrative. It's a lot trickier sometimes, to use some of the mass tools that are more accessible to people for B2B than B2C, right? So if you're not a big corporation and you don't have a ton of money to, hire big fancy, biz dev people and run commercials and do all of these things, you have to rely on the tools that are more accessible, right? Like, organic social media, all of the kind of systems we have in the digital, lead gen pipeline. And if you're a Pilates instructor, that has a new type of method and you only want to attract practitioners, you're not looking to attract, like a consumer base, how on earth are you going to reach them, right? Like you can't run targeted ads to those people. You'd be, spending, wasting a lot of money. So that's where I have found it's more a challenge of distribution when it comes to B2B versus B2C, if you are not at a stage in your growth where you have a lot of money, to spend, versus the approach and the importance of brand architecture and narrative strategy across the board.
So it's all B to H, business
Yeah.
to
Business to you. I love that.
and telling them a story that resonates with them and get aspirational and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the hardest thing that I have seen, people experience, and because of course it makes complete sense, is of course we all assume we're our own target market. Not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously, we believe we're our own target market in the sense that we understand the way the world works according to us, right? Because we have a lived experience, we have a set of values, we have, points of view around things. And so that's how we naturally and sometimes only know how to communicate. And so the art of narrative strategy is really nothing more than translating what it is that you really, really want to say into what other people are able and need to hear. And that doesn't mean you need to change that thing you're trying to say, but sometimes it does need a little bit of a different wrapper than what you even know you would be able to, come up with based on your own, lived experience.
I
Okay,
think this
good.
is an interesting spot. Sorry about that. I think it's an interesting spot where AI and language models come in. We have hundreds of different archetypes that we can spit out as brand people, as marketing folks, but the reality is we may not want to hire entire writing teams for these types of things. If you can fundamentally understand who your buyer is and the timing and really meet them where they're at, then you can use tools that are very powerful that can help you communicate in that way if you yourself are limited by only a certain type. If you're extremely aggressive in the way that you do things, maybe that doesn't land well with people. But if you are somebody that wants to, just recently I wrote something that was like, hey, explain this to me like you're my older brother coming home from college and I'm at home. It's an interesting style of narrative that where you can tell your story in a different voice and meet people where they are. But I definitely agree with that. You do need to communicate.
I agree with you to a point and conditionally. So I think that the biggest mistake people make when they're crafting their brand positioning, their messaging, and I do see your question, David. I'm gonna answer you. I love that question, and this is maybe a good segue. But people try to craft.
So just for everybody, so David's question is to architect a brand narrative for a B2B client, what inputs do you need from your clients to provide?
So people tend to try to assume what people need to hear based on market research, right? Like I've got data on this, I've got data on that. My the geography is this. It's mostly, moms, who live in this certain area, whatever. And so then you put that into ChatGPT or wherever, and it's going to spit back stuff. And that is in my opinion, the worst possible thing you can do. And I'll tell you why. Because if you don't firstly know who and what you are, you're otherwise constantly changing your narrative like a shapeshifter, like a chameleon, to appeal to whoever it is that you're trying to talk to without any center of gravity. And so the first thing that you need to do when you're building out a brand architecture is build your own center of gravity. And I always say, and this is a little sneak peek of what you'll get in my presentation, I promise, David, this is coming back to your question, is what is the function of a brand in your business, right? If the function of a sales org, for example, or like, a sales engine is to drive revenue, like what is a brand? Like, why do we need it? It's this word we always use, but most people don't know what the definition even is. If you Google it, you get 6 different definitions that are kind of sort of similar-ish, but it's really hard to build something you can't define, right?
Yeah, I
And then
would.
once we, hold on one second, if it's okay. Then
Sure.
once we do define it, why do we need it? Like, what is it serving in our business? And the answer is that it's your center of gravity. And your center of gravity that drives every single business decision you make, because it is the definition of, and these are the inputs, your vision, your mission, your brand belief, that core thing that gets you out of bed every morning that is serving as air traffic control for every other decision you make, what you're doing about that, how you're going about doing that, and then all of the what I call the operating system, some people call it values or culture, the filters through which and the lenses through which you make all of your decisions, hiring, firing, who you partner with, what to productize, and all of that kind of stuff. And when you have that, and that is language that gets locked in stone, right? At that point, can you then put it into ChatGPT to say, okay, now here is who and what I am. This is the soul of my business and my brand. That will never change. Now, how do I reach those moms who live in the Northeast who have all of these other criteria? What kind of messaging might they need to hear given everything that, we know about them, right? But otherwise, what you're effectively doing is you're trying to dress air, no mannequin, because all market messaging really is is an expression of who and what you are. And of course, like some days you're wearing a t-shirt, some days you're wearing your pajamas, some days you wear a suit. So your clothes are constantly changing. Your messaging is constantly changing. You try it on for size. You're like, oh, I like that shirt when I was in ninth grade. And now I look back, I can't believe I wore that thing, right? And that's the part of the natural maturation. But that doesn't change who you are or what you are, because one day you're in your pajamas and the next day you're wearing a suit, right? And so that's where I think that brand architecture is the most critical thing that anybody can do for their business, whether you're doing 100 million in revenue a year and you are 25 years in, or you're just starting out, because it's the foundation for everything. And in the same way that you can lay the foundation the first time, or you can build the house and then be like, something's wrong, I don't know if the floors are not even anymore, is there a crack in the foundation? You can just go and patch it up, right, and repair it, and maybe do some other things along the way. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question, David. I'm happy to elaborate if you'd like.
It does, thank you. I think the idea of having a core mission, a core vision, knowing your core, that's really helpful. Of course, not everyone knows those things in advance, or they have a sense of it, but they haven't really articulated it well, or they have articulated something, but it turns out that they're articulating something that's a bit misleading from what they actually want to be, because they've perhaps put in clever words that they thought were the good words to use. So I imagine one of your steps in your process is trying to test some of that so that you can determine, if what they think they're saying about themselves is actually true, because the market will have a say on that too. And so we want to kind of build a narrative based on some kind of reality that everyone seems to share. Anyway, so thank you. I do appreciate that.
Yes, and we absolutely do. And I would say the most dramatic shift I ever made, and because what I do is I run these brand boot camps, and they're kind of very contained experiences. Well, I will go in and I will build out your entire brand architecture, as well as the implementation roadmap of how to get you from wherever you are to where you need to go with this new narrative. And the way that I always liken it is building brand architecture, building a business is no different than going on a road trip. What is the first thing you do when you decide you want to go on a road trip? Unless you're Jack Kerouacking it, you decide where you're going to go, right? That is your vision and your mission. Your vision is the world you want to see. Your mission is how you activate against it. So imagine if you misarticulate your vision. It's like you intend to go to Canada, but you're driving straight to Mexico, and you don't know why you keep bumping into Arizona on the way, right? And so 100% of the time I work with people, they've come to me and they said, oh, I already have my vision, I already have my mission. And 100% of the time they realized that it was just completely misarticulated. Not that what they initially wanted wasn't still captured somewhere, but it wasn't actually the vision that they really needed. The most dramatic case of this was a guy who was doing about 65 million in revenue a year. He was about 25 years in. And he had a healthcare product, like one of those like perk add-ons, it's like you get your corporate package and then you can add on dental or vision or, family planning packages and things like that. He had a spousal support package, and he hired me because he said, it's become so impossible to get through to HR. I just keep getting blocked left and right. And they don't realize that I could save them up to $50 million a year in certain instances if they offer my program. And so I need language that's just going to get me through to straight to HR. And so I did, a full audit of, his company, everything he had, his products, all the rest. And it was all run through this platform. And I said to him, I was like, you're not a healthcare company. You're a SaaS company. And you shouldn't be talking to HR. And of course, you shouldn't be talking to HR about numbers. HR people are usually not numbers people by nature, right? They're human people, they're right brain people. And so numbers overwhelm them. And then they think about all the paperwork they have to do and everything. You should be talking to the CFOs and the CEOs and the board and private equity and like those people, because you actually you are a SaaS company. And so without tearing down the house at all, same company, no one was getting fired, same product. All we did was completely rewrapped what he was doing, recast his vision in the right language, and then all of the other architecture that kind of double click down, right? Because when you think about the idea of a road trip, first you decide where you're going to go. Then you have to decide what kind of trip it's going to be. Are you going in a convertible by yourself? Are you taking an RV with the friends? Then you got to figure out what like there might be 90 ways to get to Canada. We got to GPS it, figure out who's coming on the ride, your target audience, right? And then the fun stops along the way, which is your implementation roadmap of like, I need to hit this mark, hire this person, hire a new team. We completely redid his org chart, all the rest. But he walked away with a whole new company without having to undo anything he had already done. And so that was probably the most dramatic example of like, yes, how do you pressure test this, and then how do you actually make that shift without feeling like, well, I've just spent 25 years of my life building the wrong company, because it's never really the case. It's just how do you rewrap it in a story to like build a bigger Halo container, so to speak, so that you can grow, into the next level and unblock the challenges that are just, seeming like they're gravity problems you can't get through.
Thank you. That's a perfect example of what I was trying to poke at. So you got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you both. Rishi, any thoughts on it, or we'll go to the next question?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I think it goes without saying you definitely don't want to do any marketing or communication until your fundamentals are set up. You absolutely cannot move forward. Whether any of the firms I've been at leading marketing, we always need to start with a brand boot camp. You cannot understand who you are if your brand book is a mess, if you're the ethos of who you are, if the brand pillars aren't anything. And I think any marketer worth their salt needs to absolutely start with that case, because if you do not, and I like the framework most: mission, objective, strategy, tactics, right? If you find yourself jumping to tactics and everything else is a mess, ultimately all of this will collapse. A lot of times when my teams are filled with junior marketers, this is the thing that they load the most, because it's measure, maybe cut. No, actually, we should measure again and then do something about it. But at the point of actual launch, and at the point when you actually want to communicate, your fundamentals will ultimately guide what you're doing. And a lot of times for B2B clients, we found that they have put themselves in sort of a financial spot where they think they need an answer from a specific vertical in the org. They're like, it's either a sales problem or a marketing problem. And the reality is they likely have a brand problem. They likely have a brand problem that's deeply rooted in their business strategy. And their strategy could be something as simple as, hey, you are misunderstanding your customer. You're misunderstanding yourself, something to that effect, or it can be something as complicated as the fact that you're vertically integrated is the reason why you're unable to execute on these sort of things. Now, you can uncover a certain amount of that through branding, but you have to have the wherewithal to be able to take a holistic look at yourself as a business if you want to really play in the big leagues, I would say, as far as growth goes.
Thank you. And Mark had something to add. I'm going to bring him up on the stage.
Hey guys, let me see if I can't get my camera going here.
Hi, Mark.
Hey. So I'm at the beach today, it appears. But,
Remember your sunscreen.
I've known Bob for a long, long time, and he brings me on once in a while, and it's really cool to be a part of it. And probably Bob is the only one that out tenures me in the marketing world on the panel here. I started in B2C, moved to B2B2C, and have been in B2B mostly for like the last 20 years or so. And one of the things that I've seen across that arc is that much of B2B, in particular tech, has this incessant nature of thinking inside out. It's like the better mousetrap wins type of a scenario. And oftentimes they talk, I speak in terms of like a Maslow's hierarchy. There's what you do, how you do it, and what you provide. And most get stuck in the first rung or two, and they can't get beyond the point of saying, hey, Jess, I understand you and your segment and people like you. And, I've researched it and, we've tested it and we've proven it. I can scale my business in reaching need sets and user cohorts as similar to you. And I think even some of the most fundamental things. So, Jess, when you mentioned, like, how do you reach women in, Michigan or whatever you'd said, B2B isn't, it's like segmentation is, those who clicked an email the last time. It's this very temporal thing and not this very persistent thing, which is women in Michigan are different than men in New Mexico. And we market to them, based upon their need sets. And so that involves, kind of the strategic marketing concept of segmentation, which I think is persistent in all the conversation you've had here. And what I think is really refreshing is that just, from my perspective, you have a very mature view of branding and audience understanding and the value of messaging and content frameworks and segmentation and things like that, that I think B2B marketers push back on. They think branding is an ad campaign. You know, if the messaging isn't working, you just deliver more email because it's cheap and, you'll try to scale your way out of it. And the answer is that if you have crappy messaging, nobody hears you. It's too confusing and noisy. Um, in the B2B space, though, I don't push on brand as much as I would say something very commonsensical to a CEO and say, you know, um, there's certain people that hear your value proposition better, need it faster, are willing to pay more for it and stay longer. Our job is to figure out who they are and how do we communicate with them. And there are other people conversely who don't hear what your best message possible, don't hear it well. You might be able to sell them, but then they attrite quickly and then they want price concessions and make goods and all this other crap, and they cost you profit. Like, this isn't about an ethereal exercise of branding. It's about how do we align the best things that you do with the best markets that need what you do. And the brand, I think, in B2B marketers, repeating a point, they hear it as an ad campaign. I don't have money to do brand. It's like, and Rishi, your point of saying, like, we can't even start until we get our messaging framework right. Like, 1000%. I mean, the best way to waste a whole lot of money is, I just met with a CEO from a third-party logistics company the other day who wanted to hire a junior level person to execute all the stuff that he came up with. And it's like, that's the most expensive hire you're ever going to find in your life, because you're going to pay him 80 grand a year, give him $300,000 next quarter to go, market with it, and you're going to completely waste it. You just flush it down the toilet. Like, it's the most expensive decision you could possibly make. And it just happens every day, all the time. But I'll step away from the microphone. I just wanted to really say you guys are doing a great job, and I really appreciate the point of view that you're bringing in.
Yeah, I mean, I validate, all of that and say, in response to it, it's nearly impossible to figure out what the right thing to say is to the right people if you first don't know who and what you are. And when we think about, which is why you do brand architecture, and if you think about it in terms of like just us as humans, right, in the world, like we all know what it feels like to like be on our mojo, and everything in our life becomes extremely clear. Do I move cities or do I not? Do I date this person? Do I not? Do I take this new job? Do I not? Do I buy this shirt? Do I not? When we really have a strong sense of self and we're like in one of those moments, right, those seasons in our lives, everything is just like, well, yeah, because this is so me, right? Or this is something that I feel so strongly about, or, I'm so pulled to do this. It's really the difference between being pushed by pain or pulled by vision, and then there are those moments and those seasons in our life where it's the complete opposite, right? We might be in transition, we're confused, we're lost, nothing seems to be going well, right? And then we just try to throw lots of spaghetti at the wall, right? Because we're pushed by pain. We're trying to figure out, like, how do I get out of this thing, and making all those decisions. And that is the space that most businesses operate in most of the time. And so that's when people do just start putting messaging into ChatGPT and saying, like, how do I get women in Michigan, right? And that's just more spaghetti, right? Whereas if you were to kind of stop, pause, do the work which it doesn't even take very long, just to stop, pause, do that work to be like, but who am I? Figure that out. All of a sudden, like the gravitational pull to the sun dictates everything that happens in the solar system. Earth is never confused about what it's doing every day on its axis, right? Neither is Saturn or Neptune, minus a rare Armageddon. Like, everything is ordered because of that gravitational pull to the sun, and is truly no different in your business. It's just a lot of people don't do that work. And so they wind up spinning and swirling and, all the rest.
The one thing I would add or temper that with is, I'll quote an old movie here. So Swingers, you guys never seen Swingers, Vince Vaughn and John Favreau and all those guys. But when they're driving down into Las Vegas and Vince Vaughn looks over and he says, baby, you're so money and you don't even know it. I think that's a lot of companies. I've seen so many companies where the collection of what they have built and can do in the markets they could serve is just completely untapped. Like they don't understand what they have. So they're they may even have a vision of we want to be this really cool, swing dancing, cool dude, but it's not going to, but that's not what they built. That's not what they have. And so it'd be like, Nike selling shoes to geriatric people. Like maybe there's a market for it. Maybe some of them would buy it, but their vision may be wrong. They're like what they have built is actually for a different person than what they think they're trying to serve.
Mm.
And so I think it goes the opposite way as well. And it just takes oftentimes a third party from the outside in saying, what do you really have? I understand you're wanting to sell running shoes to, people with walkers, but let's examine that, a little bit more. Um, Anyways, I think there's the opposite side can be true as well. And I've seen many times people have built something. In fact, I'm going through a messaging exercise right now where let's say they have 12 tools in the tool belt, they're talking about two. And the other 10 are actually more valuable than the first two. And the collection of all of them is extremely valuable. But they're talking about two tools as if they're two separate tools and not a collection of the value of 12. And I run into that a lot myself.
Part of the brand architecture process is figuring out what that key brand positioning is. So the way I always phrase it is you have a lot of arrows in your quiver, with all these value props, but there's always one that's the sharpest, always. And that is the one you pierce the market with. But the only way you're able to get to identify, like with under no uncertain terms, what that sharpest arrow is after you are 100% certain that your vision is properly articulated, the derivative mission, the derivative brand belief, the what and the how, then it becomes clear. And so it all sort of double clicks down, on itself. And so I agree with you. I see it all the time of like this guy, I gave that example before. He was, doing really well in business, like saying I'm an HR company. I'm like, that's not the sharpest arrow in your quiver. Your software is the sharpest arrow in your quiver. You just didn't cast the right vision. And so you were building a company to the left when you really could have been building it to the right, So again, I completely agree.
Excellent. And then I want to go to we're really into this pretty deep, and I want to get into the next topic, which is AI. And I'll leave Mark up because he's got some nice background in it. So where do you guys, Rishi and Jess, where do you see AI as a tool or methodology for related to marketing, or excuse me, related to branding?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you were, let me make sure I'm not on mute this time. When you were when you're doing things at the starting point, right? And you've understood your value proposition, you've understood your brand pillars, you've created your narrative. You then have to likely with whatever org you're in, you're owning a P&L and all of that. You then find yourself at a spot where you need to communicate at scale. Communicating at scale requires a handful of different skill sets. And it means that chances are your org is you have a creative director on your team, you have a head of growth on your team, you have media buyers, you have PR people, and all of that, right? And stop me if I'm giving you a sob story about my life, right? The reality is it's not asset allocation. We want it to be asset allocation really badly. We want it to be, hey, this spending money here creates this ROI, so let's turn this up. This person understands our brand architecture, meaning they're at this point in our funnel. So if we matriculate them here, their willingness to buy will go here. The reality is the world doesn't work that way. We communicate at scale. And the only way that we can communicate at scale and personalize is if we are effectively using AI. And the reason I say this is because a typical campaign for us, most recently at ByteDance for my org, was we would put out 10,000 different iterations of different types of display ads across different regions. Now, even though my team was the size that it was, there's no functional way that we could do something like that. We can't make every single permutation of this type of information that we wanted to communicate. So what do? Take a step back. Once you've had all the brand pieces, I like to communicate very simply. And I think all communication strategies should follow this. Audience X gets information Y for benefit Z. If you can clearly articulate your audience, the information, and then the benefit that you get provided from getting that information, you've effectively created the bare bones of a marketing campaign. Now, the next steps that you take that to, whether it's the media buying that you do, whether it's the press release you do, the events, the commercials, that sort of thing, is ultimately the magic of being a marketer. Now, we convince ourselves that we have a lot of things that we can do, that you could be, you can create a creative, some form of creative asset that will solve all of these downstream problems. But the reality is that's just not the case. You effectively can talk to people in the way that they want to be spoken to, whether that's through the different ad types that you have, and then you keep measuring and you analyze, and then at the end of the month you do your reporting, and hopefully the end of the month is not the quarter, because then you have to explain it in IR, right? So that's the reality of how it works. Now, AI has to step in here, because there's absolutely no way that you can make that many iterations worldwide without that sort of support.
Yes.
I think AI is the greatest invention for doing the work that needs to get done, but doesn't really matter. And by that, I mean, if you are creating a video piece of content, right? The chances of every single frame needing to be just so in order to get the outcome you want from that piece of content, it's probably pretty slim, right? And the amount of time it's going to take an editor to create that piece of content manually, frame by frame, and, you know, working all the tools and, you know, things like that to create that video is a lot, right? It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money. Whereas you can put into AI something like, I need to create a really cool social piece of content, you know, this, that, or the other. And, you know, I need it to kind of like be like this. And like 5 seconds later, you'll have a video. Now, it may not be as good as, you know, the video that this other video creator might have created, right? But the difference between the quality and, you know, the output of the AI versus, you know, the output of the human is not necessarily going to impact the ROI, right? Or the return, right, of any kind that you're going to get on that video. And so, of course, when it comes to things like scaling and finding those efficiencies where the difference between using AI and not using AI doesn't really matter in terms of the return. So, I mean, how lucky are we, right, that we're living in this time, you know, or doing things in my world where I do a lot of writing, right? And I'm a positioner. That doesn't mean that every sentence I write is as sharp, in as few words, as grammatically sound, right, you know, as it should be. And I'm constantly using it as a tool to say, this is what I need to say. I could probably say this with 20% less words, but I can't find them. Can you help me? Right? And it will spit that back to me. And so I think that as an enhancement tool and as a scaling tool, like truly, like how lucky are we? I think that where we'll just see, you know, what happens in the future, because cultural appetites and expectations and standards do change around and reorient around the new cultural language that is born of different technologies as we go along. You know, I mean, back in like our, you know, many generations ago, if they saw memes, you know, would they have been responsive to them given how they were communicating? Or if, you know, back in Shakespeare's time, they used to go to plays for 4 hours, you know, or stand around all day, because that was just like the mode of entertainment. We do not have the attention span for that anymore, right? So the cultural languages do change. But I would like to think that the quality of what you're going to get from AI still will depend on the quality of the input that you're giving it, which still means that having skill sets, you know, that will guide the AI in the right way will still be necessary, irreplaceable, truly irreplaceable, and will just make the integration of AI into everything we do a really positive thing, you know, versus like, oh no, AI is going to take my job, because that is a real thing, I think, for a lot of different industries. So that's kind of my take on it as a scaling tool, as an enhancement tool, and as a I don't want to use the word crutch, but a little bit of a crutch, sometimes. It's brilliant. I think where it gets scary for me personally, just as like a human, is if it starts to replace some of the disciplines and crafts that I don't think it will ever, um, be able to replace properly, because AI just doesn't have heart. And I think we live in a world now where it is all about output. It's about speed of output. It's about scale of output. And it's about a lot of what happens from here up. But AI, at least yet, isn't really emotionally trained, like, especially in creative worlds, like things are produced because it comes from other places than your brain, and just so long as AI is unable to do that, that is like the truest human experience and expression of human experience. I hope it doesn't kind of take over everything personally.
I'll grab the mic. So I've put that Gladwellian 10,000 hours into AI and built a point solution that B2B marketing and sales content creation and sales enablement. Now, a couple of things that I found that are, I think, very few people have seen. And perhaps it's just my ignorant persistence, but I end up finding innovation here. So one is I started beating my head on ChatGPT, Claude, all these other models. And I just finally thought to myself, it's like, man, if this is all that AI is, this sucks. Like, it's nothing here that's really that good. And so I started getting involved with the developer forums in OpenAI. And I hear people talking about pushing megabits per second down into the large language model. And like, there's no way you could be doing that. And through dogged persistence and trial and error, built a tool that a couple of the main things that we found, we need to eliminate the chatbot part. That is the problem. So even if you have a paid version, if you when you log in, look at the 3 or 4 squares that it has there for you to try. What outfit should I wear to this party? Help me write a text message I could send to friends to come to my house for a barbecue. Like, it's not anything near the types of things that we need to ask it for in business. Now, what AI does really well is it can pull together and aggregate and make sense of hundreds of dimensions simultaneously in the enterprise AI tool, not in the ChatGPT. Why is that? In the paid version of ChatGPT, you maybe get 16 or 32K brain space. They call it context window. In OpenAI, you get 128K. So the amount of dialogue that you could hold simultaneously is much bigger. Hallucination occurs when you run out of context window, and then in the paid versions, it spills it out the back based upon first in and first out. So hallucinations are totally a part of the ChatGPT chatbot consumer front end. Now, can the LLM hallucinate? Oh, it takes a lot to make that thing hallucinate, like more than anybody's ever dreamed of. But it could. And the other part is how much can I communicate with it and back? And that is very limited. You put maybe 5K up and 5K back. I'm working on a project right now for a client, just a small messaging project. We built a tool where I could ingest an entire website in like 10 minutes. I got close to 1,000 pages off this website, dropped in a CSV format. I started deleting the metadata and then stuff about privacy rules, like whatever that wasn't going to be relevant. And I then created a training series of 5 documents, from audience to capabilities to features to messaging to positioning, where it scours. This is megabytes of information, and it can reverse engineer both where they're at today, as well as start giving recommendations based upon the audiences it finds and the capabilities and the features. And it can reassemble things that the human mind simply can't put together. A smart person can put 2 to 3 things together simultaneously. And I'm convinced that that's why much of B2B marketing content and many of the B2B sales pitches are awful inside out regurgitations of what they do or maybe how they do it. It's because to come up with the right answer of like, okay, I'm going to talk to Jess, and she's in this market, in this type of a persona role, in this industry, in that region, with this kind of perceived need. Like, I just named 6, 7 different dimensions of analysis. The average human can't do that. And so, but that is what AI does well. And another thing you mentioned, Jess, was I call it context. I think you said content or used another word. That is 100% what you can't get. Like I can upload, I've done this personally, 30 or 40 pages of a transcript of an hour-long webinar like this. It'll say it read the whole thing. It'll read 3 or 4 pages and it'll summarize the 3 or 4 pages and said, yep, I'm all done. I got that for you. And I know for a fact, I mean, I'd have to try to trick it and say, what is the last word in the transcript?
Mm.
And it'll search and search and search and find it. Well, dealing directly with the LLM, I'm like I just said, I gave it, 2 megabytes of a CSV of content. Now I chewed the crap out of tokens. I think I maybe 10 million tokens over the last day of doing this, but it's reconnecting information that is just so impossible for the average person to do. This would have been like a McKinsey study for 6 months, and I could do it in a day and a half. So there are needs that are out there. I agree, though, the tools that we look at, there are needs, there are capabilities out there. And while it doesn't have a heartbeat, what we can do is to train it with the context of who we're talking to, the types of messages that they're looking for. We could add that human element to it with which it can connect more dimensions than we can assimilate ourselves. But you're right, it doesn't have a heartbeat. But it doesn't mean that we can't give it context of understanding the needs of that person, how they think of the world, what they're trying to solve, how they interpret value, things like that. Anyways, I'll back away from the micro. That's my big soapbox. I mean, I've been on this soapbox now for a year and a half. It has literally transformed how I approach my job, like literally transformed it. And
Mm.
I can do now what, a modest team of people couldn't do in months, I could do in days now.
I mean,
Thank you.
that's a great use case. Wouldn't you also agree that LLMs are merely just one facet of AI? And I think people wholly misunderstand that content creation or just the pieces that I can talk to, much in the way people misunderstand that the assets or elements of brands or what a brand is, the same way the LLM is merely just that one piece of what AI can do. Like if you weren't doing machine learning and A/B testing early in your marketing career, then probably weren't a good marketer. But the fact that you're here, you likely were doing these types of things.
Yeah, and Rishi, I don't know if you saw David's comments. David said, I found my use of AI aligns with what Rishi said about leaving our marketing egos behind, getting outside views on my ideas, role-playing reviews from key in-profile ICP persona points of view, testing for gaps and so forth. So
I would also say it does sound like in our conversations, there's a definite scale difference in the way we're all talking about this, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're talking billions of impressions, there's a certain way that you have to attack things. When you're talking to hundreds of people, there's a different way. One is not more important than the other. I think everything in communication falls into a black box. You're either a good communicator or you're not. You either have an effective brand solution or you do not. Branding, marketing, communication, all of these things can be distilled into very specific elements, and you just really need to follow the process to get there. Now, to get to 1 billion impressions, to get to billions of impressions every month, you absolutely are using AI to get there. One of the key ways that me and my team were using it very regularly at ByteDance was content moderation, right? If you look, you can't reply to everybody that wants to interact with you, but somebody needs to reply to them. You want to make sure that you're developing some sense of community. Now, you don't know if somebody's saying something wild to someone else, but AI does. I may not be able to train it to necessarily act with a ton of empathy, but we can train it to see bad words or to see threats and things like that. And I think this is where content moderation steps in. I think the scale difference from B2C to B2B definitely changes. So if we scale it down on the B2B side, AI absolutely needs to be used for localization, for A/B testing, for iterative uses of your display ads. I don't think you should use it for video, but if you are using one image across a large campaign, I don't care if it's a few $1,000 or if it's 12 million, if you're burning 12 a month on it, you need to iterate these images, whether it's colors, shapes, sizes, the text itself. All of these need to be iterated because it is not only at no cost, the incremental cost is so low, but the potential revenue you're leaving on the table is definitely massive. So it's we can ignore the use of AI if you want. I hope it's not there. I hope the problem goes away. Check engine light. Hopefully next time I turn the car on, it goes away. Reality is it's not going to go away because you have people like me coming and we're using it. And the reality is it could feel good to avoid it, but trust me, and my teams are happy that people are not using it because we have this massive tool that's in our back pocket and we're absolutely using that.
Excellent. Well, we're up against our time limit. We can keep going. We can stay on, and I'll pause the official podcast and we can stay on and chat. David, you had more input as far as the context related tip, if related to ChatGPT. Are you able to do that in less than a minute, and then we'll go to the
Yes,
close?
it's pretty quick. It's pretty important too.
Thank you.
As you use ChatGPT, you will see it update itself and say memory updated. If you work with 5 different clients on 5 different days, it might update 5 different times, perhaps. As a consultant, you do not want to have the memory references for client A contaminate the memory the activity for client B. So you may not realize that these memory references that it's accumulating on you are in particular conversations that you're having on particular problems with particular clients. So what can we do to first identify if that's a situation we're dealing with and to rectify it? Ask ChatGPT, what memory references do you happen to have on me right now? And could you just give them to me and enumerate them, put a number beside each one? Take that output and you'll start to see, oh gosh, that's from customer A and this is from customer B. Take that output, create another document, resequence it, keep the numbers where they are, name the memory groups that you'd like to create, and then go back and say, hi, thank you for that. Here's how I'd like you to classify these memories. So that's one way to try and classify the memory references so you don't have one competitor situation kind of impacting another. Another way, which is even safer, is to ask ChatGPT at the beginning of your dialogue, please do not use any accumulated memory references for this particular dialogue. We need to start fresh. So that you don't, perhaps by accident, have ideas from 3 months ago, which are no longer valid, potentially, contaminate your activity today. So this context setting is really, really important because when I talk to you, Bob, I know who you are and I have a particular relationship with you. When I talk to my wife, I speak to her a little bit differently. When I speak to Mark, perhaps through the CMO group, I might have a different context again. I can seamlessly change contexts instantly, but ChatGPT doesn't have that until you tell it, until you give the context. So one of the things that I know to do is not remember my conversation with Bob and reference it with Mark, right? But ChatGPT doesn't have that separation. So we need to help it. And that's one thing to look out for and potentially an approach to take as you want to streamline your activity with different clients.
Beautiful. Any final words of wisdom? Jess?
Gosh, final words of wisdom. Well, I always say to people that kind of the heart and soul behind most everything I do is around this belief that in business, most people think that to win the race, you just need to build a faster car. But in reality, you first need to know the course and where the finish line is. And then, I always say to people, bring me a mess, I'll give you a map, which is kind of, it's a line actually a friend of mine gave me who I worked with. And he said, Jess, I brought you a mess. You gave me a map. I was like, I think I'm going to use that as my tagline, actually. But I
like
really
it.
believe that. I think that that's at the end of it, at the end of it all, if we really strip back, you know, how, what the source of, um, what the source of most problems are in business before we even get to how to use ChatGPT or AI, you know, before we know, do we run this ad campaign or not, or, you know, what kind of scale we're even looking for, is people just taking a minute to say, let me figure out where I want to go. What is the best route to get there? That's not to say you won't deviate along the way, or you might not run into like, oh, a tree fell down on the road that way. God, I have to get, you know, find a detour. Or maybe I changed my mind and I was going to go to Canada. Now I decided I want to go to Pennsylvania, right? But like, you first need to know where you want to go and the route, the best route to get there, and watch how much easier everything becomes. And I think we overcomplicate things in general as humans. And you know, the joy that I have, you know, in the work that I have found, you know, for myself is basically solving the problem of confusion by selling clarity, you know, and that's what I guess my little final wisdom is you, it's not just about building the faster car. You first have to know the course and where the finish line is.
Thank you, Jess. Rishi?
I'll share with you something I teach to my classes at some of the local universities here. It's a entry digital marketing class. And it's very simple. Inertia finds results. Inertia will always, always find results. If you find that you're stopping for whatever reason, just you need to pivot, whether it's with your marketing work, whether it's with your brand architecture work, your storytelling, even with your sales. If you are stopping, everything around you is also. So find the inertia, chase it, good things will happen.
Beautiful. Thank you. Mark, any thoughts?
Well, I put the mark in marketing, I guess. So the thing that I found is, I think as marketers, it's our job to understand our audiences better than our competitors. And I say audiences plural. I think segmentation is a really critical aspect of that. Our second role is to understand our competitors at least as well as they know themselves. So you understand those areas where you should push, shouldn't push, must win, can't win. And if you could do those things, which is audience research, competitive research, that drives the messaging, the brand frame or architecture, and like if without that, this is all just noise. It's activity without a plan. It's you can't scale your way out of it. I hear a lot of marketers today talking about, well, the old playbooks don't work. I would argue that that playbook never worked. It's just that the market was accepting of garbage more so than it is today. And so what's happening, I think, is the tolerance level is dropping rapidly while, you know, the cost of money and, you know, uh, the the risk of failure is increasing on the buy side. Their expectations have risen above where many organizations have thought was acceptable. And, you know, you got to fall back to the basics. Understand your audiences better than anybody, understand your competition, build that into an appropriate strategy from brand and messaging through, you know, your attack plans and sales and marketing, you'll win. It's the basics. It's strategic marketing 101. Um, you know, but I think that a lot of people have forgotten that. In my context, again, today, recent history has been B2B, which I will, you know, say that I've really appreciated hearing. I would say is a much more B2C, um, sophisticated concept of messaging frameworks and things like that today than I've heard in a long time. So, you know, it's been a joy for me to hear you guys.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and stop the podcast if you guys want to stay on and chat. But otherwise, it's been a pleasure. Good luck with the event. This will be October 9th and 10th.
That's
LA.
right. Yeah, LA
It's
Convention
no
Center.
charge. I encourage everybody to participate. I'll when we present this recording, we'll share that how you can sign up and get free tickets. So thank you guys. I'm going to pause this now.